Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chagigah Daf Vav. We are back to regular Gemara rather than the Agadatot that we've been dealing with the last few days. We're back to the interpretations of the Mishnah. We're going to basically be dealing, for the most part, with the Machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. Okay, today's daf is sponsored by Eva Schweber in loving memory of her father, Ken Schweber, on his Yurt site. His Talmud study was the inspiration for me to study Daf Yomi. My daily learning makes me feel deeply connected to him, and that is a daily blessing to me. Today's daf is sponsored by Amy Goldstein in loving memory of her grandmother. A few short announcements. The bookmark order form is up. Okay, you have till Sunday to order your bookmarks. So get your orders in as quickly as possible. You can find it on the website. There's a pop-up of it. So if it pops up when you open the website, go right away and order it. It's free. Okay, we're looking for sponsors to sponsor it to offset the costs. And there's a suggested donation if you want to offset the cost of your own bookmark. Okay, so what are these bookmarks? If you're wondering, there are 7 bookmarks, one for each Masechet of Seder Nashim, with the key terms that you need to know. So that way, if we're learning something and you say, oh, wait, I don't remember exactly what that was, then you can just use your handy dandy bookmark and you'll know exactly what the term is. Okay, I can't promise everything will be there, but the idea is to bring a lot of the key terms that will be used and fit them all in one bookmark. Okay, the second thing is, if you're at the Siyum, you already know that we're having this beautiful thing we're putting together of a display of all sorts of learners and their experiences and their favorite quotes. And we want to collect videos of women who are learning now and have joined the learning, or maybe have been learning for many, many years. And at the Siyum Moed, we want to basically put this up on our site, and it'll be something that will be growing as we continue learning. People should send in a video. You can find also the details on the website with all what you need to send in, with either a very short video of your favorite quote or a short video of your experience learning, how you got into it, what it means for you, under 45 seconds. There's some examples there. It's going to be the learner's tapestry. Okay, so please send in your stuff as soon as you can get to it. Okay, we're going to now start at Daf Hey Amud Bet at the bottom. Ezehu katan kol she'eno yachol lirkov al ktefo shel aviv. Okay, who is a katan? Anyone who can't ride on his father's shoulders. So matkif Rabbi Zer, it's a little bit not clear what this question is. We'll explain it according to Rashi. There are those who explain it differently. For example, if you're using the Koran, they have a different translation of this. But matkif Rabbi Zer, he asks a question, and this question is really on Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Both of them say, and maybe this is a detail you might not have paid attention to, there's something similar about what they both say. Ezehu katan kol she'eno yachol lirkov al ktefav shel aviv v'la'alo miyerushalayim lahar habayit. The first definition is Beit Shammai. That means if you can't ride on your father's shoulders, getting from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. Or Beit Hillel, who says if you can't hold your father's hand and go with him up from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. So now the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Notice what they both talk about, going from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount. But how did the child get to Jerusalem? And the question is, what do you mean, how did he get to Jerusalem? So Rashi says that the question is really, we're obviously talking about a very young child. Okay, a very young child in their understanding always needs their mother. Okay, whether the child's still nursing possibly, which we'll see from a question that comes up very soon. So therefore, the child still needs their mother, and the mother's not coming on Aliyah Regel. How did the kid get to Jerusalem? Right? We're talking about taking the kid from Jerusalem to the Temple Mount, but with the father. But how did the kid get all the way to Jerusalem from his house if his mother's not around? To which the Gemara says, right, ad hachaman atye. Says, until this point, who brought him? Until he's now with the father going up to Har Habayit. We're assuming the child is not separable from the mother. So Amarle Abaye ad hacha de mechayve ime besimcha. Itite ime. Until this point, the mother is still supposed to go to Jerusalem because the mother is obligated in korbanot simcha. Okay, in the sacrifices of simcha, meaning the shalmei simcha. We talked about there's 3 types of korbanot. You're going to see this inside today. In the beginning of the Masechet, there's korbanot shlamim of Chagigah that everybody brings, and korbanot riyah, olot riyah, right? There's 2 different kinds. Ola is burnt. The whole thing goes up to God. Shalmei Chagigah are ones that the owners eat part of them, and part gets burnt on the altar. And then there's shalmei simcha. Shalmei simcha is are sacrifices that we would bring to have extra meat, and that women are part of. So either women are part of it because, right, that's the food that they ate on the holiday, and that was what they ate the meals together. And Women are part of Simcha with the family. I remember when we learned about Psachim and people said, where were the women in all this, right? They didn't go on Aliyah Regel. They didn't, right? So here you see that they were supposed to go to Jerusalem with everybody. To get to Jerusalem, women are obligated. They don't have to go inside the Azara. There they don't have to go. But they are supposed to be in Jerusalem. So therefore, the mothers brought them to Jerusalem. Beyond that, they didn't, okay? So now, again, they could, they just didn't have to. So now, that's how we get it, okay? So therefore, until this point, the mother brings to Jerusalem, mikam ve'elach, then it all depends whether the katan is going to continue farther or not. All depends on Beit Shammai or Beit Hillel, what you hold, at what point the child needs to go with the father. They quote here only Beit Hillel. If at that point, when the kid got to Jerusalem with the mother, and then the father can take him and walk, they can walk together, the child can separate a little while from the mother, and he can make it all the way to Har HaBayit, then he's going to be chayav, but if not, then patur. And according to Beit Shammai, if he can go on the shoulders, then yes or no. Heishiv Rebbe, Tachat Beit Hillel. Now you have to assume the kid's not nursing according to Beit Hillel, right? The kid's already older, but the one who goes on the shoulder could still be nursing. Now what's nursing in halacha and in general in the Gemara? Nursing they assumed was 2 years. Okay, most mothers nurse their children for 2 years. There's all sorts of halachot that connect to nursing mothers nursing their children until 2 years. So now Heishiv Rebbe, Tachat Beit Hillel. Rebbe, who's a later Tana, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, at the end of the Tanaitic time period, he says that Beit Hillel, who was living earlier in the Tanaitic time period, the students of Hillel, could have asked Beit Shammai the following question. They could have said, L'divrei Beit Shammai, v'chana lo alta, ki amra le'isha, ad yigamer hanar ve'habiotiv. Chana did not go up. In the famous story in the beginning of Sefer Shmuel, when Elkanah goes to the temple, it says, Chana didn't go because she said to her husband, ad yigamer hanar ve'habiotiv. Remember, Chana prays for a son. She's never a son for a long time. She finally gets a son, Shmuel. And then it says, when her husband went to Jerusalem, she didn't go. She waited until he was no longer nursing. Now, theoretically, he was already in an age, Hashmuel, he was already in an age he could have ridden on his father's shoulders, right? That's probably from the age of a year old, or I don't know exactly when, but before the child's finished nursing, the child could definitely ride on his father's shoulders. So his father, Rebbe's father, which is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, says to him, what do you mean? Forget about that Shmuel didn't go because he was too young. What about Chana herself? She should have gone to Jerusalem. Well, again, it wasn't Jerusalem. It was the Mishkan at the time. She should have gone up to where the Mishkan was in order, right, to Shiloh. She should have gone there to be part of the mitzvah of Simcha. So she didn't go either. So now he says, why didn't she go? She saw that Shmuel was an overly sensitive child. Okay, mifunak, we saw that term used the other day with someone who can't go without shoes on, right? A little bit extra sensitive to things. Shmuel was a mifunak. She was worried that Shmuel wouldn't make it the whole way. Okay, that Shmuel was a very sensitive child, wouldn't make the way. So first of all, I think it's an interesting, right? There's a few different explanations. I see, Caroline, you're writing one of them, which is she was worried about bringing him there because she knew that once she brought him there, he would be gone forever, right? He would be there forever working because she committed that he would work there. So that's number one. But number two, I think even more so, I would say that maybe it was the way she treated him, right? And then I'll give the combination, but she had prayed for this child and she was nervous, right? And you can imagine a mother who prays for a child for a very long time finally gets the child. She's going to be a little bit overly nervous that what if something happens to him? So it could be that she was just nervous and didn't want to send him because she was overly protective of him. And now, it's true they do say it about Shmuel though, but if you think about it, an overly protective mother often breeds a child, right? A child of an overprotective mother often becomes overly sensitive, right? And then it's a combination of factors. If the mother overprotects him, then he also doesn't become tough as he's growing up. So it could be it was a combination of the two factors. By Rabbi Shimon. Okay, that's the end of that section. So what did we do so far? We just asked this question, how did the kids get to Jerusalem? We basically said, it must be they were with their mothers until that point because the mothers are actually obligated in Shalmei Simcha. They did come to Jerusalem. Again, whether everyone did or not is a separate question. You see here, mothers of very, very young children did not, okay? And then right? That's how we explained the Mishnah. By Rabbi Shimon. Now we have a separate question. Rabbi Shimon asks, Katan chiger l'divrei Beit Shammai. A child who is lame, can't walk. But Beit Shammai said, all you have to do is ride on your father's shoulders. Remember, why is a regular lame person exempt? Because it's hard for them to walk. We saw that in the words of the Mishnah. We saw it in the words of the Braita. It's hard for them to walk. According to Beit Shammai, you don't need to walk, right? Because your father puts you on his shoulders. So what's the difference if you're lame or not? It doesn't really matter. So the question is, a young child who can go on his father's shoulders but can't walk, are they obligated? Even though if he's older, he wouldn't be obligated, but it's kind of, right, counterintuitive. But now that he's young and he doesn't need to walk, maybe he'll be obligated. Likewise, summa l'divrei shnehem, a blind person, according to both. What's difficult about a blind person? It's hard for a blind person to walk because they can't see. Now, if this child is being brought with his father, holding his hand or on his shoulders, right, whether you hold Beit Hillel, whether you hold Beit Shammai, basically, he's holding his father's hand. His father guides him. It doesn't really take him much longer. You can question that, whether that's true or not. Certainly, on Beit Shammai's opinion, it wouldn't take any longer. And maybe even Beit Hillel, it wouldn't really be so difficult because he's with his father. He has a guide, which would then mean, by the way, that any sumu has someone, blind person who has someone to help him, maybe is not exempt. So, mahu, what's the halach? So the Gemara says, hechigami, what kind of case? Now, these are going to split, the lame and the blind are going to split into two. There's a lame person who can be healed, or a blind person who can be healed, who it's a temporary problem. And then there's people in their mind who could not be healed. Right now, with modern medicine, you never really know, right? Anyone potentially could be healed, maybe. They might come up with some new technology that would be able to do that. But in any case, let's just assume we're in their time where they kind of knew yes or no. So he says the following: is it a case where they can be healed or they can't be healed? That means he will not be healed, or suma she'eino yachol litpatach. So it would be totally crazy to say that this person is obligated when they're young, because what's the whole point of a child being obligated? Remember, we said it's midin chinuch, so they learn to do it when they get older. This person will never be obligated when they get older, so there's no point to obligate them now. So if it's that hashta gadol patur katan mebaya, if when they get older they're going to be exempt, of course they're going to be exempt when they're young. So and that's for the logic I said. Chinuch is to teach them how to do it when they get older. They'll never get there, so they'll never get to a point where they're obligated. Maybe they can go if they want, but they'll never be obligated. So therefore the question must be has to be a case where they could potentially become healed. So what's the halacha? And that's what the question is about. So Amar Abaye says, here's your answer. If when you get older, you'll be obligated on a d'oraita level, so we do train you when you're younger. When the gadol is exempt on a Torah level because they'll never be healed, then the katan, even d'Rabbanan, is going to be exempt. Okay, they won't be obligated midin chinuch. So there it splits into, will you be obligated when you get older or will you not? If you will be, then we're going to obligate you. We're now moving, that was the first machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel in our Mishnah. We're now moving to the second one. The rest of today is going to deal with the second one, although we'll get off on a bit of a tangent that relates to the second machloket. If you remember, we didn't really understand this machloket yet. Now we're going to understand it much better. We're going to have a structure of Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, machloket. How much money do you spend on the olot riyah? What's the minimum amount you have to spend on olot riyah and the minimum amount for the korbanot chagigah? Okay, not talking about the simcha, because remember, that's all kind of optional if you need more meat. But there's a minimum amount for riyah. There's a minimum amount for chagigah. Again, riyah being olot, burnt offerings that get all burnt and go up entirely to God. So it's called olat, goes up. And shlamim, which are called peace offerings, which are offerings that parts of them get burnt on the altar, and the majority of the meat goes to the owners to eat. So Beit Shammai Omrim. And then what we'll see is two claims of Beit Shammai, reasons why he holds that way, two reasons what Beit Hillel holds. Each one is going to have to counter the arguments of the other. And then we're going to say it's part of this is all premised on some other machloket. And in that machloket, Abai is going to say there are going to be two other rabbis who side with Beit Shammai on that other issue and two other rabbis who side with Beit Hillel. That's a whole separate aside. We'll get to that soon. So Tanu Rabbanan, now we're going to have a Braita with detailed arguments between the two. This is very common in the Mishnah. It just simply says the machloket, but in other Braitot, other sources did make it into the Mishnah. There's a more detailed account of the debate. Beit Shammai omrim, ha're'iyah shtei hakesef, v'ha'chagigah me'ah kesef. So the re'iyah is 2 and the chagigah is 1. Okay, again, what these amounts are, I'm not going to get into the details. I don't want to get you distracted by the main point. You can always look these up, how much of these coins they were, etc. But you now have double the amount minimum has to be spent, from a minimum perspective on the re'iyah. It has to be at least 2 kesef and the chagigah only 1. Shal re'iyah ola kulo legavoa, right? The re'iyah goes up to the heavens. That's much more important. Something that's entirely for God is obviously much more significant than something that's meant for us. Masha'en came the Chagigah, right? The Chagigah doesn't go up entirely to God, so it's less significant. Ve'od, right? If you're going to spend your money on yourself or God, what's obvious? Spend your money more on God or something that's for God. We'll see the counter argument to this soon. So if you don't agree with this, don't worry. There's another claim. Ve'od, I'm just trying to, while I'm in Beit Shammai, totally prove his point. Ve'od matzinu ba'atzeret. We're going to use Shavuot is an example. Sheriba bahena katuv ba'olot yoter mi b'shlamim. There's more korbanot olah by shlamim. There's 10 korbanot olah when it comes to Chag Shavuot, specifically for there's Shiva Kvasim, and then there's Par ben Bakar Echad, Elim Shnayim. Okay, you have 2 rams, 1 bull, and 7 sheep offerings. Okay, that's for korban olah. And then there's Shnei Kvasim b'nei shana l'zevach shlamim. There's 2 kvasim for the zevach shlamim. There's also a chatat, not separate, but series in for chatat. But you basically have 10 versus 2. So here you see, lot must be more important because we have way more when it comes to Shavuot. Beit Hillel omrim, hariyah ma'ah kesef. The re'iyah is only 1, and chagigah shtei kesef. Chagigah is 2. Shechagigah yeshna lifnei adibur, ma she'en kein beriyah. This is a big line that's going to keep us busy most of the daf, which is the korbanot chagigah existed before Matan Torah, which is not true for olot riyah. There were no olot riyah sacrificed at Matan Torah, but there were korbanot chagigah. We're going to have to see this all inside. Where they get this from, we'll hold off for right now because that's going to be what the Gemara is going to deal with for the most part the rest of today. Ve'od, second claim. Matzinu, so basically his proof is, look at Har Sinai. They brought chagigot. They didn't bring olot. That means chagigot are more important. Okay, they didn't bring olot riyah. They brought korbanot chagigah. Next, ve'od matzinu b'nisim. Okay, we have in Parshat Naso, each of the nisim brought gifts. Okay, the gifts included sacrifices in the sanctification of the Mishkan. Sheriba ben akatu b'shlamim yoter mi ba'olot. Okay, here altogether we have 204 shlamim, and we have 36 olot. Okay, so there you have a huge difference, much bigger than by Shavuot. And you have way more shlamim, which means maybe shlamim is more important. So that's his 2 claims. So now we have to say, why doesn't each one hold like the other? Beit Hillel, my time alo amarei kebeit Shammai. So first claim, we're going to go 1-1. Dika amarta, by the way, there's charts on the sheet that kind of chart this all out that'll help you on the study guide for today. So Dika amarta re'iyah adifa da'ola kula legavo. I'm going to argue with that claim. You think because it all goes up to God, that makes it more sanctified? Adchaba, I'll give you the reverse logic. Chagigah adifa dipe shtei achilot. What does that mean? 2 eatings. What does 2 eatings mean? So you have to get into the mindset of korbanot, and we're going to see this a lot when they talk about sacrifices. There's the eating of the people who eat the meat, and then there's the eating of the altar. It's called that the altar eats it. Okay, the word ukal means to digest, right? Echol is to eat. Ukal is to digest and also to get burnt. Okay, I think it's by the sneh bu'ar, and then ukal. I think it appears there in the text, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, ukal is to get burnt on the altar. It's also from the language of consumed, basically. If you say, right, you use the English word consume, gets consumed on the altar, and it gets consumed by man. What's more special than something that man and God share together? Okay, it reminds me of this chetzio laHashem debate, right? Is the holiday supposed to be part from us and part for God? Or kulo lashem, kulo lachem, or maybe entirely for you or entirely to God? Is there something to be said for something being entirely one way or splitting it 50-50? Right? What's more beautiful, Beit Hillel says, than something that God gets part and we get part. It's actually not 50-50, but the idea that we're both together in this. And that's what Beit Hillel says, that makes it even more strong than the Ola that just goes up and we don't even get any part of it. So it's a very interesting debate, right? It's almost a theological debate. So now that's his first claim. If you want to learn it from Shavuot, I'll give you a very good reason not to learn it from Shavuot. Olat Riyah is an individual sacrifice. Each individual is supposed to bring, right? It's not the korbanot tzibur, the communal offerings that get brought on the holiday. No, these are offerings that each individual is supposed to bring when they come on Aliyah LaRegel. They're supposed to bring a sacrifice. By the way, it reminds me, the Daf Michelle Farber this week is up. If you listen in Hebrew, specifically about the whole idea of Aliyah LaRegel, about coming up for the holidays. In any case, they say here that if you're going to learn it from a chag and the korbanot brought on Shavuot, that's a communal offering, and the Olat Riyah is an individual offering. So therefore, Danim Korban Yachid, I'd rather learn it from the Nisim, because what are the Nisim? Each individual head of tribe brought a sacrifice. That was an individual offering. Yes, it was on behalf of the community, but it wasn't a Korban Tzibur. It was brought. What's the main difference, by the way? Whether it comes from your own money or it comes from, going back to Masechet Shkalim, all the money they collected in the beginning of the year, the half shekels from everybody, that goes to pay for the communal offerings. So therefore, don't learn it from Shavuot, right? You don't learn details of an individual offering from a communal offering. Those are in two very different categories. So therefore, he knocks out both of Beit Shammai's arguments. Beit Shammai now, we have to knock out both of Beit Hillel's arguments. My time below Amrika Beit Hillel. So the first argument, you said, you think that at Har Sinai, before they got the Torah, there was only Chagigah? You're wrong, right? You said there was no Re'iyah nami yeshna lifnei adibur. Not only were there korbanot Chagigah, there were also Olot Re'iyah. Okay, we're going to have to see this inside in another minute or two. But it says clearly there were Olot Re'iyah. So I don't know what you're talking about. And number two, T'kamarta nelach mi Nisiim. I'll teach you why we shouldn't learn from Nisiim and we're better off learning from Shavuot. Danim davar hanoheg l'dorot, midavar hanoheg l'dorot. Shavuot is something for all generations. So is our korbanot olot riyah. But ein danim davar hanoheg l'dorot, midavar she'eino noheg l'dorot. The Nisiim, when they brought their sacrifices at the sanctification of the tabernacle, that was a one-time event. We don't learn from one-time events. One-time events have their own unique circumstances to them. One-time events, we learn from things that are continuous. Therefore, it doesn't bother me, Tzibur Yachid. I'd rather side, in others, all things being equal, maybe you're right. But if I have a choice, I'd rather side on learning from a Korban Tzibur, a communal offering that will last forever, that's a commandment forever, rather than one that's only for that generation. Obviously, it didn't last forever because we don't have a temple, but you understand the concept. It's supposed to, as long as there's a temple and a place to sacrifice sacrifices, you're supposed to do it. Okay, next. Now what we're left with is what we didn't really explain, which is, what's this debate between them? Were there Olot Riyah in Matan Torah when they got the Torah at Har Sinai, or were there not? So Beit Hillel, Ubeit Hillel, Ma'ishna Chagigah D'yeshna L'fnei Adibur. Now they're going to say, I don't understand Beit Hillel. You say that we're Korbanot Chagigah, not Olot Riyah, but look at the verses. Okay, so now we're going to read, and I brought this on the sheet, so you can look at your sheet if you want. I'm going to read from chapter 24 of Shemot. Okay, the way the order of the Torah is, there's Parshat Yitro. In Parshat Yitro, they get the Torah. Matan Torah, Har Sinai, right? Big, all those things went on. Then we have Parshat Mishpatim, which details all sorts of laws. At the end of Parshat Mishpatim, there's this strange section that kind of brings us all the way back to Matan Torah. And even many people say, Ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah, there's no order in the Torah. And this section happened before Matan Torah. And that's the section that we're dealing with right now. Okay, it says there, and here you'll see why, because the El Moshe Amal, the first verse, Ale El Hashem, go up to God, meaning go up to the mountain. Atav Aaron, Nadav, Abihu, v'Shavim Yitznei Yisrael, Yishtachavitem Rechok, bow down from a distance. This sounds like it all happened before, because Moshe is going up to the mountain. V'nigash Moshe levado, but Moshe goes by himself. Hem lo yigashu, ha'am lo yalu imo, right? They didn't go up the mountain. Everyone was standing there. Moshe tells them then what God said, right? He's the intermediary there. That kol mishpatim and all the rules, okay? Vayan kol ha'am kol echad, and they all answer. Vayamru kol dvarim asher diber Hashem naaseh, right? Everything that God says we will do. Vayichtov Moshe Divrei Hashem, he then writes it. Vayishkem Baboker, he wakes up early. Vayivem Mizbeach Tachad Ahar, he builds an altar under the mountain. Shtem-asar Matzeva, the Shtem-asar Shivkei Israel, he does a monument for all the 12 tribes. And here comes the important verse. Vayishlach et Na'arei B'nei Israel, he sends out the Na'arei B'nei Israel. There's a whole debate, what are the Na'arim, not for today. Vaya'alu olot, vayizbechu zvachim, shlamim lahashem parim. They bring olot, they bring zvachim shlamim, okay, olot of burnt offerings. Zvachim shlamim are peace offerings for God, parim, bulls. We're going to get to the bulls at the very end of today's daf. But right now, we want to focus on the olot and the shlamim. Now, the assumption here, everyone agrees that the korbanot shlamim were clearly korbanot chagigah. Why? Well, what more place for celebration than getting the Torah? So they were korbanot chagigah. Also, it says, they make a reference to the verse when Moshe says to Paro, let us leave because we want to go v'chagotem chag la'Hashem in the midbar. We want to go have a holiday for God, a celebration in the desert. Some people say that's referring to this and that they're korbanot chagigah. That's their proof here that it was korban chagigah. Okay, so they were celebratory offerings. So that we get. So they say, but Beit Hillel, I don't get it. You say shlamim is chagigah. Well, Re'iyah Nami Yaktiv. Also, there were Olot Re'iyah, because it says, Vayalu Olot. Now, what better place to be bringing Olot Re'iyah than Ma'amad Har Sinai? They saw the presence of God more so than any other time in history. So obviously, they're going to assume the Olot there must have been Olot Re'iyah. They were going to see the face of God at Har Sinai. So, of course, they brought Olot. It makes perfect sense. Olot Re'iyah. That's what the Olot must be. So, Beit Hillel, you said there were only Chagigah before they got the Torah, and there weren't Olot Re'iyah, but here's, in that pasuk, it says there were. Kasavre Beit Hillel, Ola Shekli V'Yisrael B'Midbar, Ola Tamid Havai. He says, no. Those Olot were not Olot Re'iyah, contrary to what you might think. They were the Korban Olav, the Korban Tamid, the daily sacrifice. What they did there is, and it makes sense they did it first. We always say Tadir V'Sheno, Tadir, Tadir Kodem. You do always the more regular thing. They brought first the daily sacrifice, and then they brought these Vachim Shlamim for the celebration. So he says it was a Korban Tamid. So this is the basic argument between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and this is where we're going to line people up. Few rabbis on Beit Hillel's side, a few rabbis on Beit Shammai's side. Were these Olot Re'iyah, or were they Olot Tamid? Okay, was it the Korban Tamid that they bring the daily sacrifice? So Kasavre Beit Hillel again, I'll just repeat it. Ola Shekriv Yisrael B'Midbar was Olat Tamid. Ubeit Shammai Savre Ola Shekriv Yisrael B'Midbar Olat Re'iyah Have. Beit Shammai says, I counter your claim because I think the facts on the ground were different. It wasn't what you think that it was the Korban Tamid, it was the Olat Re'iyah. So now the Gemara is going to say, Amar Abai is going to come, and this is typical for Abai. He does this a lot. And there are some others who do this as well, but he's one of the most popular people who do this, or the person who does this one of the most. Abai says, Beit Shammai, for Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yishmael, Kulus Viralu Olash Klivus Rabban Dvar Olat Re'iyah. He kind of takes opinions stated in different contexts and says, in fact, they all say the same thing, even though nobody says it explicitly, or maybe someone does, we'll see. But some of them say it not explicitly, but it can be inferred from what they say that really all these people hold the same thing when it comes to were these korbanot olah, olot re'iyah, or not. So Beit Shammai, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yishmael all think that it was olat re'iyah. How do we know? So before he says that, he now sets up the other side. Beit Hillel, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili are all on the other side of the argument. They all say, Kulus Firilu, Olah Shekil Yisrael B'Midbar, Olat Tamid Avai. Okay, they sacrifice the Korban Tamid. Beit Shammai, so now we have to go, echad, as they say, one by one. Who says what? And where do we know it from? So Beit Shammai, we don't need to say. Hadamaran, we already said. Their counterclaim to Beit Hillel is, what do you mean? Chagigah is not more important because the Chagigah was done at Har Sinai and the Olot Re'iyah weren't. Olot Re'iyah were also done at Har Sinai. So Beit Shammai were set. Rabbi Yishmael, Ditanya. Here's a braita. We're going to say Machlokah Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva isn't relevant, by the way. For this, Rabbi Akiva doesn't connect to the Rabbi Akiva that we're going to see on the other side. But Rabbi Yishmael says, Klalot ne'emru b'Sinai upratot ba'ol moed. The general principles were given at Har Sinai, but the details of how to do them were given in Ol Moed, which is in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, where it says God spoke to Moshe at all Moed, and he gave him all the details. So the details came later. For Rabbi Akiva Omer, Klalot u'pratot ne'emru b'Sinai, v'nishnu b'ol Moed, v'nishtalshu b'arva Moav. Rabbi Akiva says, right, people don't remember things. They need to learn it 3 times. So, okay, this is apropos the discussion we had after learning the skills class, those who were there this week. So they were given all the details at Har Sinai. They were repeated in Ol Moed, Sefer Vayikra, and they were repeated a 3rd time in Sefer Dvarim, right, which is often repeating things we learned before. Now, what does this machloket have to do with it? We have to go back to Rabbi Yishmael. Right now, Rabbi Akiva doesn't interest us. We want to know how Rabbi Yishmael, by saying the words, they got the general principles, but not the details. How does he get this? If you say the olah that they sacrificed in the desert was a korban olah tamid, well then, mi kamidi timi ikara lo bayev shef nituach ulavaself bayev shef nituach. The korban olah is a sacrifice, a general korban olah. You have to do shef nituach. It's a way of taking off, flaying the hide. That was given in detail in Sefer Vayikra. Now, they say, if you didn't get the details earlier, it doesn't make sense that the first time they brought the korban olah, the korban tamid, they didn't do hefshef nituach, and then later they did. Basically says it has to be they got it right the first time. It doesn't make any sense that we would bring a korban tamid for a certain period in one way, and then later we change and do it differently. This reminds me, my mother-in-law, Shalom, used to teach girls for their bat mitzvah. And one of her main things I remember her always saying was, I always tell the girls not to practice in the beginning, because if you start practicing and you have it wrong, it'll be ingrained in you the wrong way to do it. And that's what I thought of when I read this, because there's no way they did it in a wrong manner, basically, the first few times they did it, because they wouldn't do it wrong and then learn later how to do it right. That would be very confusing, and it just doesn't make sense. It must be the korban olah was always done, the olat tamid was always done in a particular manner from day one. If Rabbi Yishmael says from day one they didn't know the laws, well, then it must be that they didn't actually bring the korban tamid until later when they got the laws. So therefore, he doesn't think that before Matan Torah, when they stood at Har Sinai, that they did an olat tamid. Okay, we're going to later knock this argument out the window. But right now, this is the argument. Rabbi Elazar, so we got Beit Shammai, who says clearly the olot were not the olat tamid. That's his counter argument to, right? They were olot riyah. That's his whole point, that against Beit Hillel. Next, we have Rabbi Yishmael, who says they didn't have the details. If they didn't have the details, they clearly didn't bring the sacrifice. Number 3, we have Rabbi Elazar, Tanya. He's going to be very clear about this. He's going to be the first one who says it straight on. Well, truth is, Beit Shammai said it straight on also. Olat tamid ha'asuya b'Har Sinai. This is in Sefer Bamidbar in Perek Kafchet when it describes all the sacrifices. And in a verse there it says, Olat tamid ha'asuya b'Har Sinai, that was made in Har Sinai. Now this is weird. It should have said Olat tamid that was sacrificed at Har Sinai. What is ha'asuya that was made in Har Sinai? So Rabbi Elazar Omer, ma'aseha ne'emru b'Sinai, how to do it was told, or the fact that you're supposed to do it was told to us at Har Sinai. V'hi atzma lo kirva. But it actually wasn't sacrificed. If it had been sacrificed, it would have said the one that was sacrificed at Har Sinai. So there you see, it explicitly says not. Rabbi Akiva here is going to argue. Remember, Rabbi Akiva is on the other side, and we're going to see that right here. But right now, we're bringing this only because it's part of the Braita. We're not yet up to the second side. Okay, so we're still in Rabbi Elazar. We just bring the whole Braita. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Karva v'shuv lo paska. That day it was sacrificed, and it never stopped. In other words, from that day on, every single day they did the korban tamid. So there you see Rabbi Akiva is on the side of Beit Hillel, which is what we're going to say in one more second. So now they continue on with the question of Rabbi Akiva. If Kervav is Shuv Lo Paskan, every day in the desert from the day they stood at Har Sinai, they did the Olah Tamid. So Mani Makayem, what do I do with this verse in Amos, which describes how bad the people were in the desert? And it says, this is a rhetorical question. Did you, the Jewish people, bring sacrifices and meal offerings in the desert? No, you didn't. For 40 years, you didn't bring. So how could Rabbi Akiva possibly say they brought the Korban Tamid every single day from then on? So what do they answer? Don't worry about that pasuk. That pasuk says Beit Yisrael. But Shivto Shel Levi Shelo Avdu Avodah Zarah Hein Ekrivu Ota. Shevet Levi in the desert, right? We see this with Cheda Egel. They didn't worship the Cheda Egel. they brought the Korban Tamid every day. But the rest of the Jewish people not. Now, you might say that's a little strange. Don't they always bring the Korban Tamid? It's the Kohanim who come from Shevet Levi, who bring the sacrifices on behalf of the people. But what they mean is, no. What did I mention before? The machatzira shekel. Everybody gives half a shekel in order to have money to buy the sacrifices. In the desert, apparently nobody gave money for sacrifices. They weren't part of it. Only Shevet Levi took care of it. They gave the money for it. I don't know where anyone got money from, but they basically funded it on their own without the community. And that's why the Pasuk in Amos is talking about everybody else. When Rabbi Akiva says they sacrifice Korban Tamid every day, what he meant was Shevet Levi took care of it. So now, again, what did we do so far? Beit Shammai and Rabbi Ishmael, who says they only got the rules and not the general principles and not the details, which means they couldn't have done the Korban Tamid without having all the details. Number two, we have Rabbi Elazar, who says clearly, Olat Tamid Asuya, Bahar Sinai, Asuya means they learned how to do it, but they didn't actually do it. They're all with Beit Shammai. Now we're going to get to the other side, which is going to be a little simpler because we already learned part of them. So Beit Hillel, Hadamara, Beit Hillel already said, only the Chagigah, not the Olat Riyah, which means those Olot were not Olat Riyah, and which means what were they? They were Olat Tamid. Okay, it was the Korban Tamid, the daily sacrifice. So we know Beit Hillel holds daily sacrifice. And Rabbi Akiva, Hanami Amaran, well, that we also just said. That Rabbi Akiva said explicitly in the Braita with Rabbi Elazar, he said, Karva v'shuvlo paska, they brought the Korban Tamid that day and for every subsequent day after that. Rabbi Yossi Galili, where does he say this? Well, Ditanya, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yossi Galili Omer, Shalosh mitzvot nitztavu Yisrael ba'alotan larega. When Bnei Israel, this is what I talked about the first day of Chagigah, there were three sacrifices they're commanded to bring on the holiday, Re'iyah, Chagigah, V'simcha. Okay, there's only one line in this Braita that's going to be relevant for our purposes, but we're going to learn the whole thing anyway. There's three types, the Olot Re'iyah, the Chagigah, right? Remember the difference. Olah Re'iyah is Olah, it goes up to God entirely. Chagigah and Simcha are both Korbanot Shlamim. The Chagigah are the ones you're supposed to bring on the first day. If not, you can make it up any other day. You bring ones. The Shlamim are ones that we fill in order to have meat on the holiday. That was the one that women are obligated in because they're obligated to eat on the holiday and be part of the family celebration. Yesh b'riyah she'em b'shtehen, v'yesh b'chagigah she'em b'shtehen, yesh b'simcha she'em b'shtehen. Classic structure of some sort of Tanaitic source, right? They categorize, okay? There's each of these things has something that's not true about the other two. So now we get the titles that Chagigah has some, right? Re'iyah has something the other two don't. Chagigah has something the other two don't. Simcha has something the other two don't. Basically saying each is unique in one way. Yesh b're'iyah she'em b'shtehen. What's unique about the korbanot re'iyah? Sha're'iyah ola kula legavoah. That's what I said before. It gets entirely burnt to God. That's what makes it unique. Masha'en kem b'shtehen. The other two are peace offerings. Yesh b'chagigah masha'en b'shtehen. Shechagigah yesh na lefnei hadibur masha'en b'shtehen. This is our key line. What does Rabbi Yossi Galili say? Chagigah happened before the Dibur. That means before God appeared at Har Sinai, which is in chapter 24 of Shemot. Again, there's no order in the Torah. This happened before Matan Torah, according to this. So that existed before Matan Torah. There was a case of Chagigah, but Ein B'Shtehem, the other two, no. So what do you see here? The Olat Re'iyah was not sacrificed. That wasn't the Olah, which means what was the Olah? It was the Olat Tamid, which means Rabbi Yossi Galili must agree with Rabbi Akiva. Now we just have the last line to finish before we get back to the Gemara. We're still in the Braita. Yesh b'simcha she'em b'shtehen, sha'simcha nohega b'anashim u'b'nashim masha'en b'shtehen. Remember, that's what we just said before. It's a good review. Korbanot simcha, women are obligated as well. Women are not obligated in Re'iyah and in Chagigah. So now I told you that Rabbi Yishmael is going to get knocked off the list. Here comes the knockout. Rabbi Yishmael, my time kamokim le kibet shamai. What was your reason? And now we're going to repeat the reason why we thought Rabbi Yishmael, who said they only got the general principles, but not the details. Isal kadatach, this is exactly the claim. We're just quoting what we said earlier. Isal kadatach, if you think, if you're going to say it was the Korban Tamid, it's not possible that they did the Korban Olat Tamid first in a different way, and then later when they learned the rules, they changed the way they did it. Not possible. Well, if that's your whole claim, we're going to have a problem with Rabbi Yossi Galili, because what does Rabbi Yossi Galili say? Rabbi Yossi Galili da'amar olah shekir v'Yisrael b'midbar olat tamid avai. He claims, number one, we already said this, that the Olat Tamid the olah that they sacrificed at Har Sinai was the olah tamid. Therefore, according to him, you have to wait till we see the second statement of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the first time they did the korban olah tamid, they didn't do it with the hefshed and nituach, with taking off the hide in the way they're supposed to. And then later, when they learned the rules, they did. How do we know this? Titania, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, olah shekrivu Yisrael b'midbar eina tu'unav shep nituach, lefi she'en shep nituach ela me'ol mo'ed va'elach. The olah that they gave in the desert, the olah tamid was not done with hefshed and nituach. That's only something you need ol mo'ed for. So that was only instituted later. So what do you see? This whole theory I said about don't practice the wrong way because you'll always do it wrong. No, apparently not. Apparently, in the beginning, they did the olah in one way. Later, they did it in a different way, and that clearly doesn't bother him. So if that's Rabbi Yossi Aglili, because he says two things that originally we said those two things can't coexist, but he's one person, and he said that, and he said that. So therefore, it must be they did the olah tamid, and they did it differently, in which case, Smei Rabbi Yishmael Mikan, we have to take Rabbi Yishmael off the list. It's not clear just because Rabbi Yishmael said they didn't get the details till later that they didn't do the olah tamid then. Could be they did it and they did it differently. So knock him off the list. So we now have one with Beit Shammai and two with Beit Hillel. Okay. Now we end with one very small thing. By Rav Chisda. Hi krahe chiktiv. They now want to read this pasuk, and this is a good example of how punctuation is very critical. You have to remember the Torah originally wasn't written with punctuation. We said recently it wasn't written with the vowels. It also wasn't written with the Tamei Mikra. Tamei Mikra is a tradition. And sometimes you'll see things in the Gemara that don't match the Tamei Mikra. Okay, the Tamei Mikra, there's an Nachta, which says take a break in the middle of the verse. There's other things which work like commas, breaks, all sorts of things. They tell you how to read the verse. So here we have an example of a verse that can be read in two different ways. And the question is how? Because again, there was a tradition maybe about Tamei Mikra. It could be in this case, there were two different traditions. Okay, I'm going to challenge you to go home or you probably are home. If you are home, open up a Tanakh, a Torah, a Chumash, look at the Tamei Mikra and see which way our Tamim go. Okay, Vayishlach et Na'arei B'nei Israel. This is that last verse. So the Na'arei B'nei Israel went, Vayalu Olot. Okay, the verse reads, Vayalu Olot, Vayizbechu Zvachim Shlamim LaHashem Parim. They gave Olot, right, the burnt offerings. They gave Zvachim Shlamim, they sacrificed peace offerings for God, Parim, bulls. So now the question is, Vayalu Olot, or Olot Kfasim, which by the way, Olat Tamid was done with Kfasim, with the lambs. Vayizbechu Zvachim Shlamim LaHashem Parim. Now notice the word Kfasim does not appear in the verse. But do they say, they mean they brought Olot, and they just didn't tell you, it was obvious they meant Kfasim, lambs, and Vayizbechu Zvachim Shlamim LaHashem were bulls. Or Odilma idividi parim havu. Or do you read the verse as Vayishlach et Na'arei B'nei Israel colon Vayalu Olot Vayizbechu Zvachim Shlamim LaHashem Parim? Okay, or is it that right? And then they brought Olot and Shlamim, bulls, and the bulls were for both. Okay, so L'may nafkamina, the Gemara says, okay, who really cares, right? What's the practical relevance of whether they brought Ola? Basically, the difference is, did you bring with the Ola offerings, the burnt offerings, were they lambs or were they bulls? Okay, so who cares? Mar Zutra Amar, we're going to have two nafkaminas, what we say. Okay, nafkaminas is, right, practical relevant differences between the two. So the Pisuk Ta'amim, Mar Zutra says it all affects how you're going to put, where's the Anachta in the Pasuk, right? Is the break after Vayalu Olot, because Olot were Kfasim, and then the Parim is part of the second part of the verse, or is the break before Vayalu Olot, right? Na'arei B'nei Israel did that, and then Vayalu Olot, Vayizbechu Zvachim Shlamim Parim LaHashem Parim. So that's the first one. Okay, so your homework is to go see what the Tamei Mikra say. Okay, what the notes say. Here's a really practical difference, more so than even just how do you read the Torah, which is important, right? Because you're supposed to read the Torah the way the Ta'amim are. Number two is, what if you take a vow? And in that vow, you say, I'm going to bring a burnt offering like the one they brought at Har Sinai. So, my parim havu or kfasim havu, right? So the question is, Do you have to bring a bull or do you have to bring a lamb? That would be the big relevance. Okay, that's obviously an if, right? If you were to say such a thing, you'd need to know what you want to bring. I don't know how many people did that kind of thing, but theoretically, you could see one might do that. And the Gemara answers, Teku. We don't know how to read the pasuk. So that's why it's interesting to see what the Tamei Mikra in the end, because Tamei Mikra can't leave things open both ways. It has to decide one way. So that's your homework for today. Have a great day, everybody.